Released in 2018, the Google Pixel 3 and the 3 XL were solid if controversial entries into the Google Pixel line, as was quickly becoming tradition. The smaller Pixel 3 had no real big issues, but the 3 XL, well, I can think of at least one. It's probably the only thing that this phone is really remembered for, and I do have to wonder, is that really fair? I mean, there was a lot to like here. A refined, beautiful glass design, stellar photography, that clean Pixel software experience with numerous updates to come in the future. Is it truly justified to boil this phone down solely to one questionable design element, particularly one that is completely absent from the smaller model? Well, yes it is. The notch is insanely dumb, even if the rest of the phone did bring a lot of good. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91Tech, and it's hard to believe this monstrosity was already released nearly 7 years ago. Or, well, maybe it isn't. It's definitely a bit of a time capsule, and the perfect symbol of the absurd trend of notches from the era. But when you look beyond just the crazy cutout, there's actually a lot of good to this phone. So today, let's take a look at the 3rd generation Google Pixel. How does it hold up all these years later? The first Google Pixel and Pixel XL were a decent start for Google's new line of smartphones, if a bit on the safe side. A simple aluminum build and big chunky bezels, but at least you had that bright blue color. The Pixel 2 and 2 XL would refine this general design, feeling far more premium. The 2 XL in particular brought a more modern look with its still thick but at least curved bezels. The display was infamously awful, however, with this crazy blue tint to it, and the headphone jack was gone as well, which wasn't great. Were it not for what was without question the best photography on any smartphone at the time, by a long shot, this phone would have had very little going for it. But despite its numerous issues, that clean Android experience plus excellent camera made for one of the best flagships of 2017. Google might have made some mistakes with their first couple phones, but the future was bright. All they had to do was stay the course, double down on what they do best, and avoid bringing in any more major compromises. The 3rd generation, if it just fixed what the 2nd gen did wrong and maybe brought some thinner bezels, it had the potential to be a smash hit. But then, months before the actual launch in October 2018, the Pixel 3 XL design leaked, and surely these can't be true, right? Surely Google wouldn't incorporate the most insane, ridiculous, and hideous large, ugly notch ever, right? Well, no, these were real, as we would soon see with the launch of the Pixel 3 and Pixel 3 XL.
Finally, it's time to talk about phones. Google Pixel 3 is designed from the inside out to be the smartest, most useful device in your life.
Pixel 3 was built with exceptionally beautiful and thoughtful design choices.
We're going to be covering both sizes of the Pixel in this video. Obviously, I have them both here. The smaller Pixel 3 is actually my friend's, and yes, it is destroyed. I'm not sure exactly what he did to it. It's definitely seen better days, but huge thanks to him for lending it to me for this video. The larger Pixel 3 XL is my own phone, and it is also cracked. I bought this phone back in the day when it was still relatively expensive, so it was an easy way to save some money, and thankfully it doesn't impact the experience. Right off the bat, it is really clear to me that the smaller Pixel 3, it just looks like a sleeker phone. Even though the notch does bring some practical utility, not a lot, but some, aesthetically, it's hard not to like the smaller Pixel 3, and it looks really good. So a lot of the criticism I'm going to have really doesn't apply to that model, but it's hard not to look at these phones as a combo deal, because they kind of are. There's very little difference between the Pixel 3 and 3 XL, aside from, well, mainly the notch. The Pixel 3 has a 1080p 5.5-inch display, with bezels sort of similar to that of the Pixel 2 XL, while the 3 XL has a 1440p 6.3-inch screen featuring a large cutout to make room for what both phones have in the dual firing speaker and dual selfie cameras. Yeah, dual selfie cams, which would be unique to this generation of Pixel, and we'll cover what that entailed later on. I've always had very conflicted feelings about this notch, and really notches in general. Firstly, yes, you can black out the notch in settings on the 3 XL. I'm very aware of this, but the vast majority of people who actually use this phone definitely never utilize this feature, and there's other stuff you can do to make it a bit better, but the big question here, notches, good or bad? Now on the Apple side, I've never had any issue. The iPhone X brought this wide notch that left the corners of the display with room for the time and battery life. It made sense because the top of the screen was generally reserved for this type of info anyways, so the notch ended up blending into the iOS experience seamlessly. Add in the utility of Face ID, which was really impressive technology and needed the space, and you've got a setup most people could live with even if it did look a little bit goofy at first glance. But of course, anytime you see Apple doing something new, you're going to see a billion Android phones quickly trying to to replicate the same thing. The Essential phone actually beat the iPhone X to the market, so I'll give that one a pass, but from that phone onward, we saw a very familiar trend arise. Ugly Android phones with notches of varying sizes, but all of them still had these big honking chins. And that's what really annoyed me. These phones just didn't look right, and it's why I prefer the look of the Pixel 2 XL or the smaller Pixel 3 to that of the 3 XL. Yes, the notch leaving the corners of the display untouched technically does have practical benefit, and I'm sure you would get used to how it looks, but from a design standpoint, it just still feels off. But mind you, this is a complaint that applies to most Androids with notches from around 2018. The real issue with the 3 XL notch is how deep it cuts into the screen, and it leaves the clock and the icons just sort of floating. It is a complete waste of space, and a shorter but wider notch would have served much better. Plus, it all looks ridiculous, kind of like a robot face or something. It's maybe not the ugliest phone in the world, but it would definitely make a top 25 list. Oh hey, I've made that video already, what do you know, link in the description. It's clear Google wasn't exactly proud of this notch either, probably not helped by how much it was clowned upon months before the phone was even revealed. When you start to look at all the marketing surrounding the 3XL, you'll quickly realize Google would do their best to hide the notch in any promotional imagery or commercial. Like, look at any shot that's shown in this ad. They do their darndest to avoid showing the one part of the phone that makes it actually recognizable. They'll cut off the top of the screen, or they'll have the camera app open, which blacks out the top anyways, or they'll have a dark wallpaper. Seriously, it takes to the 53-second mark of this 90-second ad to finally see the notch clearly. That's crazy. And in the actual presentation for the Pixel 3 and 3 XL, Google uses some really weird angles and dark wallpapers to do everything they possibly can to avoid showing the notch properly. Like, look at this, it's ridiculous.
So we've designed Pixel 3 XL's screen to extend all the way to the upper corners, giving users an edge-to-edge viewing experience with some extra useful space at the top.
Finally, 5 minutes in to them announcing this phone and showing it off, we can finally see a shot that more or less gives a clear idea of what the notch actually looks like. But it's just so obvious they knew this design wasn't going to be popular, and it's, I guess, maybe the boiling frog situation where they kind of give glimpses of the notch until they finally show off the whole thing. I mean, for the ad, if you've watched 53 seconds of a 90-second ad, you're probably invested enough to live with the notch, right? And you know what, I'll say it, yes, this phone is ugly from the front, but I still think Google should have just owned it, because like, who cares? It's just a phone. It doesn't drastically affect the software experience, and it gave the device some sort of identity at least, which is something Pixels really were still lacking at the time as they struggled with poor sales. The implementation, however, really did need a lot of work. Like, look how close the muted ringer icon is to the notch. This should not be spaced this way. It's too close. It feels so lazy. The next year's Pixel 4 and 4 XL would do away with the notch altogether, bringing back big bezels as well as some weird radar tech that we won't go into. That's a video for another day, but basically Google ditched the notch hard, and it's difficult to blame them. As I said with my recent Pixel 2 XL review, Google always seemed to make 2 steps forward and 1 step back with these earlier Pixels. The 2 XL had the terrible blue tinting display, and this phone had the notch, but even with 1 step back, this device still did make those 2 steps forward, and perhaps nowhere is that more evident than with everything else about the design. So let's take a closer look at the phone I have here in my hand. From the back, the 3rd generation Pixel still probably has my favorite Pixel design of all time. It takes the iconic two-tone look from the first couple generations and dials the premium feel up to 11. We've got this frosted glass backing contrasting beautifully with the glossy top part hosting the camera. That single camera lens barely even has a bump to it. It honestly feels very refreshing, especially compared to Pixels of today. For colors, we had a few options, just black, clearly white, and not pink. I love the contrasting power buttons on the models that have those, and the just black model I have here is also pretty nice. There's something about this older Pixel design that I just really love, and I can't help but feel Google kind of lost something with their newer models. The Pixel 4 especially just feels so boring in comparison, although I am a sucker for the orange. We do have USB-C on the bottom of the phone, which is great, and we also have IP68 water resistance, which was an improvement over the IP67 rating on the Pixel 2. No headphone jack, yeah, but what are you gonna do? With glass comes wireless charging for the first time on Pixel, which is the main reason they swapped from the aluminum of the Pixel 2. The Pixel 2 felt good in the hand, but this phone, it just takes it to another level. It's fairly thin and light, and again, without much of a camera bump, it's just so sleek. That's really the best way to describe this phone. The fingerprint reader on the rear would be gone with the Pixel 4, then back with the Pixel 5. Classic Google move right there. But what we have here is fast and reliable, unlocking your phone as quickly as you would expect. The haptic haptics are pretty great, and using this phone it feels so good to me. I really like it. Dual front-firing speakers are also nice to have, and the smaller Pixel 3 from the front is a pretty great looking phone. The bigger one, well, it tries its best. The battery is bigger and better on the 3XL compared to the smaller 3, but both should have lasted a day no problem, at least way back when. Today, probably not so much, especially as these batteries degrade over time, but there probably aren't too many people actually using a Pixel 3 these days anyways. I mean, it is pretty old at this point. While I love the design of this phone outside of one specific element, and the display is pretty good, the hardware itself did leave a bit to be desired. It wasn't exactly future-proofed. The Pixel 3 and 3XL are powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 chipset and 4GB of RAM. The Snapdragon 845 was the standard for basically any 2018 Android flagship, so that's good to see. 4GB of RAM wasn't uncommon at this point still, but it was a bit on the low end, and without more memory, this phone hasn't aged quite as gracefully as it probably should have. For internal storage, we're looking at only either 64 or 128GB, but you did initially get free Google Photo storage with your purchase, so this wasn't a big deal back in the day. Originally shipping with Android 9 Pie, the Pixel 3 and 3XL would receive a few years of updates up to Android 12. Android 12 at this point is already pretty out of date, but it still feels fairly modern and it runs okay, at least on my Pixel 3 XL, which notably isn't anywhere near full for storage. I would imagine the longer you use the device and the more stuff you have downloaded and installed, the slower it would become. Thankfully, with Android 12, we can install practically anything you'd want to. How it actually performs would depend on the intensity of the app, but again, overall, fairly modern experience. When it comes to custom ROMs, there appears to be modern Lineage OS support still available, so props to those who've kept this phone alive. Like with the Pixel 2, this phone is pretty open-ended for what you can do with it, and it's great to see there's still some semblance of a community out there. For this video though, I've kept it as Google's left it, so on Android 12. And again, general performance is fine. I did see some slowdown here and there, but generally at least the UI itself seemed to run smoothly enough. It's when you get into things that are more intensive, or even just having a few apps open in the background, that you really start to feel the age. Battery life was also pretty middling for me as well, but I mean, this is an old phone, so that's not surprising. There's some fun quirks with the Pixel 3. One is Active Edge again, which allows you to squeeze the phone to open Google Assistant, or now Gemini, I guess. It's cool and all, but I still wish this could have been mapped to other functions. It's not hard to just hold onto the home button to open the assistant. Another feature was this flip to shush, or whatever, where you can put the phone face down and it'll go silent. Again, we can black out the notch in settings, or we can install an app to do that for us and actually allow the time to be up there, which is nice. But if you do want to do it the authentic Google way, you need to go into developer settings and scroll way down to display cutout. What's hilarious is when I chose the hide option, the screen shrunk down and kept a virtual notch. What the heck are we even looking at here? This is ridiculous. It magically fixed itself after I played with it for a while and rotated the display, and then when I switched back to the defaults, we suddenly have this far thicker top bezel. I know these are developer options, so bugs are to be expected, but this feels just really silly considering Google themselves made this phone and should know exactly how large their own notch is and how they need to render the display, but I digress. It's fine, whatever. Best experience, honestly, just keep the notch as is. It's not that bad once you get used to it, it just looks goofy. All in all, the hardware here is by no means this phone's strongest suit. It's probably of the weakest, in fact, and while the clean Android software is great and Android 12 on a 2018 phone is very respectable, it's still nothing too special. What made the Pixel 3 stand out more than anything else is the same thing we saw with the second generation, that beloved Google Pixel photography. The Google Pixel 3 and 3XL have two selfie cameras, both 8 megapixels, one wide and one ultra wide. This was an interesting choice by Google, and this is the only Pixel generation to have done this. And it's wild because Google was still determined to stick with only one camera on the back, but then they did this on the front for this unique dual setup, and it's pretty good, at least when it comes to stills. The video is shockingly disappointing. It's only 1080p 30, really, no 60 FPS. Overall though, the actual selfies you would take are as great as you would expect, and having the versatility for a wider shot, especially if you're in a group, definitely not unappreciated. There's a reason it never came back, but still kind of interesting at least. It's when we turn to the rear things get a bit more familiar with that single 12.2 megapixel lens, and I believe this is the exact same physical sensor that we had in the Pixel 2. That's not a bad thing, mind you, because the Pixel 2 was easily best in class, and the Pixel 3 only continues that trend. What you're seeing here is a mix of pictures I've taken recently for this review, as well as those I took years ago when I actually got the phone. And look, there's a reason and most reviewers in 2018 agreed this was the best smartphone camera on the market. It's not perfect, and there is a certain lack of versatility here compared to competing phones of the time that had multiple camera lenses. There's no ultra-wide, and zooming in 2x is all digital, so ideally you should stick at 1x zoom when possible, but the results are still fantastic. They've got that distinctive pixel look to them, very similar to what we saw with the Pixel 2. These very sharp images with a somewhat cool color tone that I find really appealing. This phone can take consistently great pictures, and while obviously the flagships of today are more capable, for a 7-year-old device this is really impressive. This was also the year Google introduced their night sight feature, which was made for capturing images in low light environments, and it was brought a year before Apple brought their own night mode for some perspective. Stills across the board are just super solid, and the portrait photos were also a very popular highlight for users around this time too. I really don't have too much to say here. Big thing for me is that these pictures look nice, and they've held up well. There's only one area where the Pixel 3's camera setup falters, and just like with the front-facing camera, it's going to be in video recording. It can only record in 4K 30, and the results are just not that good. An iPhone or even a Galaxy flagship from the same year easily outperforms this, and it's actually pretty surprising Google was so bad at making video look good when their stills were just the best. Google would get better at this with time, but it's still a notable downside in the otherwise high-end photography of the Pixel 3 and 3 XL. As a whole, the 3rd gen Pixel still has an amazing camera setup that does impress me all these years later. I would take this camera over a modern budget Android phone any day of the week, and Google deserves huge props for making their photography as impressive as it was in 2018. The Google Pixel 3, and particularly the Pixel 3 XL, are some of the more difficult phones to review in retrospect. On one hand, I really like this device. It feels good to use, both on a physical level as well as the software experience. It's not as fast and spiffy as it once was, and apps don't stay open very long in the background, but Android 12 is modern enough that it's not exactly obsolete either. This phone is nearly 7 years old, but you wouldn't think so based purely on what it can bring to the table, and the photos it takes are still pretty great, all things considered. But then there's everything bad that can't be ignored. The notch, memes aside, is absolutely atrocious design. There is zero excuse here. Apple's notch was easily the best implemented of any on the market by 2018, and yet even they received constant criticism, so I don't know why Google thought this would be a good idea. If you're going to chase a trend, at least do it right, and as we've explained, this notch was not done right on any level. It looks ugly, it doesn't add anything really that useful, and I think the fact that Google did their best to hide it in marketing speaks volumes about just how ridiculous this whole situation was. There's more to this story for the Pixel 3 too. There have been a lot of problems with phones bricking themselves via emergency download mode, turning Pixel 3s into paperweights, and while it's difficult to discern just how widespread this issue was, it was enough to see a lot of articles report on it back in late 2021, and I've found far more recent forum posts about it too. I think at the end of the day, the simple reality is that the Google Pixel 3 and 3 XL were decent phones with some of the best photography available, but they were never great phones. The Pixel 3 line was actually quite successful, relatively speaking. They sold around 9 million units, but this is a drop in the ocean of smartphone market share, and it's only in more recent years that Google has finally started to gain some real ground. Plus, sales really fell off after the Pixel 3 with the Pixel 4 line. I'm not exactly sure how they pulled these numbers, but I imagine they also included a newer member of the Pixel 3 family that I haven't mentioned yet, the Pixel 3a and 3a XL, phones released May 2019 that had no notch, a plastic build, a lower powered Snapdragon 670 chip, and an actual headphone jack, all at a more budget-oriented price point starting at $400. Most importantly, however, these phones had the same camera as the Pixel 3 and 3 XL, which made them some of the best value smartphones on the market if a good camera is what you were looking for. I think the Pixel A line was a really good idea, and while Google Pixel as a whole would have a few more rough years, I do think they've been on a far more positive trajectory as of recent. All in all, the Pixel 3 and 3 XL are fun phones, and hold up about as well as you could hope for any 2018 flagship, minus that hideous notch anyways, but at least it's something that helps the phone stand out, right? I don't think anyone would remember the Pixel 3 XL too much without it. In any case, I think we're right about done here. It was a lot of fun to take another look at this phone after a good few years. If you found this video interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. We do have a Discord server if you want to come join the great community over there, and huge shout out to the channel members for being amazing people. Thank you guys so much for your support. And thank you all for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.